Welcome back. In this lesson we're going to import our mesh that we exported out of Maya, and we're mostly going to focus in on the blade and sculpting in the high poly detail. So let's go ahead and import our OBJ that we wrote out. So I'm in my OBJ exports folder, and I'm going to grab the last one I did here and import that. And as I mentioned before, we're at a different scale here, as you can see as I pull back. We're in meters here, and we modeled this in centimeters. So let's go ahead and scale this up by coming over to the Select Move Tool tab, choosing Scale, and under Scale we've got X, Y, and Z going across here. So I'm just going to type in 100 and hit Enter, and in the Y and in Z. Okay, so we can come back out here now, and we should see that. That looks better, so the tools will work properly now. I'm going to come back to my Sculpt tool tab right here and just select Sculpt, and that will take away the scale manipulator. And we can see our wireframe on here. That's W. We'll toggle that on and off. This is our base mesh that came in. And before we start subdividing this and working on it, I want to replace this base material that came on here, the default material, by right mouse clicking. There's also marking menus inside of Mudbox. For this one we're going to assign a new material, Mudbox material, and I'm essentially going to turn this into a Lambert. So I'm going to click on diffuse, choose a middle gray, maybe something a little darker. And for the specular, I'm going to choose pure black, so we want no specularity on here, and say done. And for the name, I'm going to do material underscore blade, and go ahead and close that. And over here we have an object list, so we've got some tabs running over here. This is sort of Mudbox's version of the outliner. This is everything happening inside the scene, so the default cameras that come with it, perspective top, side, and front, just like Maya. We've also got a single directional light in our scene that we don't want to mess with. That's the default light. That was the default material that we just replaced with our material blade. And then the blade mesh right here, the OBJ, if we select that, it turns yellow. I can right mouse click over here and say deselect. Okay, and just coming back over here to the layers tab, we've got sculpting layers and paint layers. So we're just going to focus in on sculpting for this lesson. I do have another tutorial out in the character modeling for Maya 2017 that goes into the paint tools for painting characters. But for this, we're just going to focus in on creating some of the edge damage that we want to get on here, making this look worn and scraped up and damaged a little bit. So that's what we're going to be doing in here, is just focusing in on the sculpting. Okay, so let's go ahead and subdivide this. If we come under mesh, we can add new subdivision levels. The shortcut is Shift D, so I'm going to click that once. We'll notice over here that we have gone up to a new level 1. I'm going to Shift D again to level 2, and we can see the poly count going up. Level 3, and we're just starting to get mesh that we can work with. There's level 5, and I'm probably just going to take it all the way up, so we're just over 1 million right there. Okay, and let's go ahead and turn the wireframe off on that. And we can come in here and see our edge quality now. It's looking nice. And for coming in and kind of roughing up the edges here and getting that edge damage that I would like to get, the tool I use for that typically is the scrape tool. So it's this one down here. As far as tools go, you can kind of see what each one of these do. The sculpt tool here is the most common one. The scrape tool is nice because we're going to kind of be cutting in and taking away the edges here and having them look worn. So when you select a tool, over here you're going to get the attributes for that. So there's size, we've got strength, we can mirror. Okay, so we can mirror in a number of different directions depending on the mesh. I'm going to go ahead and just turn that off for now. And we can use stamps with these. So stamps are down here in this tray. Stamps get added onto the end of the tools here, and they change the way they function. So I can choose one of these, and if I come over here and use spray, which I'll be doing a little bit later, we'll see this pattern kind of affecting the mesh out here. We can also randomize it and have it rotate, move in X and Y scale, and so on. Okay, so I'm going to leave random off. I'm also not going to use a stamp right now. We can also affect it in other ways by the stamp spacing. If you hover over here, you'll get an image that pops up that kind of gives you a visual as far as what's happening. So with spacing on, the stamp gets spread out the higher the number is. Okay, we can snap to a curve, which we're not doing in here. We can also do something called steady stroke. I don't think we'll be using that in here for this lesson. This basically allows you to pull it in a direction where you can see an edge and follow that and have a nice clean sculpt. Okay. We can also flood a scene. We're not going to be doing that, and there's some advanced settings down here. Okay, as far as the pen pressure, I'm just going to leave everything at default. And for fall off, we can choose different fall offs on here. We can also come over to this tab right here. This is the default one, and I'm going to actually switch over to one that's close to linear. It's just got a little bit of a curvature here because I want a pretty sharp fall off on my brush. Okay, so back to stamps here. I'm probably going to just work without stamps, so just click off here and just work with the bare tool. Let's see what it looks like when I put this on here. This will just sort of break it up a little bit so it doesn't look quite as smooth. And I'm going to switch over to my Cintiq pen. And the shortcuts or the hotkeys for scaling the size of the brush is B. So if I hold B down and I drag my pen across here, or the mouse, you can see the scale of that changing. So I'm going to take it down to something fairly small, and the strength hotkey is M. So I can hold M down and slide up and down, and that will change the strength. So I'm going to bring it down to around 15. And before we get started, we're going to create layers for our different areas that we're sculpting on. So I'm going to start by just clicking on this plus button right here. This is going to create a layer. I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to call this Edge Damage. Okay. And I'm also going to turn the stamp off, and to speed things up here, I'm going to turn mirroring on, and then I'll come back over and make a second pass on this once I'm done all the way around here with the edges, and turn mirroring off and going back and make some variations. But this is going to kind of speed things up here. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm kind of scrubbing along the edges here and creating what looks like a damaged edge. So I'm actually going to make the brush a little bigger and I think a little stronger. Let's try that. And I'm going to move this up here. There, so that's working a lot quicker. Okay. So I'm just varying the amount of pressure and leaving these corners alone. I'm going to come back and kind of adjust these corners, and you can see this is also starting to mirror, which doesn't look great. So I'll make some adjustments on those as I come back around. But I'm just going to try to get the main edges covered here on both sides. just coming around here. Okay, and across the top here. And once I'm done doing this, I'll come back and refine some of the areas here. So this is just kind of a first pass. And again, I'm going to leave that corner alone because I've got mirroring on. It's going to look a little strange. And just check the other side. Alright, so that looks good. And I'm going to turn off mirroring. And come over here. I'm going to make the brush a little bit smaller. And then come over here and start to down the front of the blade. So I can turn the strength up quite a bit here and try to notch out a little area like this. So I don't want to take out too much. Once you really start digging in there and taking out a lot, you probably want to go back to the mesh and model part of that in. But you can certainly take out some smaller pieces. Just checking this side over here. So just taking down this corner here and then working my way up the blade. And maybe just one more little notch right there. Okay, and you want to pull back and just kind of look at some of the overall shapes that you're creating here. You don't want to be making too tiny of little details in there that are not going to read from a distance. Okay, and I think I want to bring this up a little higher. Make it a little bit more obvious. Okay, so something like that. And yeah, so I have kind of a scalloped thing going on here that I don't really like, so I'm going to knock some of these high points down. Okay. Alright, that's looking better. So I'm going to come across the back here and maybe knock down one corner here, leave the other one a little more intact, and dig that out a little bit right there. And then this is where I'm going to just make some variations on the different sides here. And actually fix this area right here. Maybe take down this corner some. Okay, and hit this edge right here. So notching this out a little bit more. Okay, same thing here, just making some subtle changes on this side so it doesn't look completely mirrored. Okay. Okay, so that looks okay. Let's go ahead and start on the next layer here. So I'm just going to add a layer again. And this is going to be just some overall texturing. So I'm just going to call this texture 1. Probably have a couple different versions. And let's go ahead and save our scene out. And I lost my area here, so back to Mudbox, adding that on, and so I've got a dot mud right here, so I'll have to go back and fix that. It added it on twice. Okay, so for our second texture here, I'm actually going to go up another level or two. Once you create a layer, if you go up and subdivide, if I take this up a couple here, so up to level 7, this new layer that I have not worked on yet, I can work on, but I cannot go back and work on a previous or a lower level here. So I've got a level 6 on my edge damage. Won't be able to work on that unless I level down, and you can page down to do that. Okay. Alright, so I'm also going to change brushes from scrape. We're going to use the standard sculpt, and I lost my stamp for that one, so I just want to come down here, grab this one, randomize it, and I'm probably going to randomize this a little bit more, so this is how it rotates. Again, I'm going to turn mirroring back on just to speed this up, and come over here and sample that. Okay, so I can see a little bit happening in there. It's still pretty subtle. I'm going to try inverting the function. And let's take the strength way up here. Right, so it's just putting some very subtle detail on there. Might be a little difficult to see here on the monitor. So I've actually got the strength all the way up, and let me see if I have anything else on here. So snap to curve is probably what's messing that up right there. So there we go. We can see some of that now happening. Okay, so this is creating just some variation in the surface. And we can see it happening a little bit better over here on this side. Adding a little bit there. And I'm going to take off the invert function and allow it to build. I'm also going to switch over to spray and just see if I can get a little bit more build up on here. And that seems to be working. Okay, I'm going to take off mirroring as I come across the top. I don't want to have a butterfly effect on here. Take the brush size down. Alright, same thing across the bottom here. And on the back, adding a little detail there. Okay, let's bump the strength up on here, just see if we can get it. A little bit more obvious there. Now we're starting to see it cut in there a little more. Okay. So the spray tool makes some very nice patterns here when you're trying to randomize things a little bit more. And I want to get under here and just add a little bit more detail. Okay. There, you can see once I angle it away from the light, you can see a little bit more of what it's doing. So I want to hit it right here. Same thing across the top. So I start off using mirroring just to speed up production, and then I come back with that turned off and go over it again, and that creates enough variation that it does not look like it's a mirror or a duplicate of the work that you've done. Okay, so I think that's good. Right there. Okay. Alright, I'm going to save it again and go ahead and make another layer here. So this is going to be texture 2. And what I'm going to try to do here is get some pitting in the surface to add a little bit more wear to it. So I'm going to actually turn my stamp off now. I'm going to come over and use the stencil area, select this stencil, and line it up over here. So you can tile the stencils so you don't have the problem of running off an edge. If you're working over here and you run off the edge, you'll have to come back and kind of hide that edge. So just using stencils will prevent that from happening. And so I'm kind of zooming in here, and then holding down the S key, I can use my right mouse button and pan side to side, and that's going to zoom that pattern up or down. And then I can use my left mouse button and rotate it. Okay, and then Q will turn it off, so you can toggle it on and off with Q. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my Cintiq pen. So I have some variation here. I'm going to hold down the B key, make that a little smaller, and just start dropping in a few little areas here that look like they're pitted. So I'm not doing a lot. And I want to vary the size of it, so I'm going to make some of these larger. And Control Z allows you to undo in here. I'm not using it, it's been crashing on my system. So what I get is what I get right now. You can go back over. If you hold down the Control key, you'll invert a selection. You can see I just made that bump out. And then you can use the Shift key and come back and smooth something out. Okay, and that's not smoothing down too great. Yeah, I knocked it down enough. Okay, so if I want to kind of come back over these and smooth them down a little bit, I can do that by holding down the Shift key. Okay. This area right here. Alright. And then just kind of moving on here, across the bottom. Alright, just changing the scale of that now. A little smaller and coming over this. Scaling that up now, adding a couple larger ones in there. And sometimes it's nice to get these in along the edges here where you've created the edge damage. You kind of come in here and drop a couple in close to the edge or even over the edge that you've sculpted. It will further kind of break up that edge and make it look more realistic. So I'm taking down the brush size to just kind of control where I'm putting those holes in there. Okay. And I'm going to hold down the shift key and kind of smooth that out a little bit. Hit that a little hard. Right. And then across the top here I'm going to add a little bit. Along this edge, across the back here. And you'll notice that I'm turning the mesh towards camera here, so I'm keeping it kind of flush against the or flat against the stencil. If I don't do that, I can get some stretching problems. So you want to keep turning your object towards camera so you don't do something. It probably won't work so much on here, but you can get some stretching if you try to paint across the top at an angle like this. They may end up looking a little odd. Okay, so kind of hitting the corner right now. I've got that angled to camera and then rolling over to the top. Coming back along here. Okay, and I think what I'll do is just kind of finish out one side, so I'm not doing the whole thing, and then offline I'll come back and finish everything up, and then we'll proceed with taking this out and moving on into substance. Okay, so I'm going to add yet another layer here. Call this texture 3. I'm going to turn off this stencil and look for another stencil that will give me a little bit more detail. And before I begin sculpting on here, I am going to take it up to level 8. And we can see how many polygons we have now. It's getting up there. And I'm also going to save again. And I'm going to use one of the stencils that will kind of break up my surface again and allow for, that was W, for the metal to look like it's aged and damaged. So I'm kind of angling this in here like this and coming back with my Cintiq. I'm going to use the sculpt tool for this one. Probably turn this down. I want to keep it kind of subtle. I don't need a stamp on with that. Okay, and then make the brush size larger and start sculpting some of this in here. So this is raising the surface up, and I don't necessarily like that. I'm going to just turn this off, and actually let me go ahead and just test it with inverted See if I'm getting the effect I want. Yeah, so that's eating into the surface there, which is more of what I'm after. Okay, so I'm going to turn this off, create a new layer. Texture 4. And I'm going to take the strength down and the brush size up and just very lightly go over this. So you can see it's kind of eating into the surface, which is what I'm after. I don't need it everywhere. I'm just going to add some detail around the blade. All right. Over here in the corners. I can see where the stamp is coming to an edge right here and repeating, so I'm going to just avoid that little area and move it down like that and add a little bit more right here. Okay, so I also want to run this across the top, and I'm going to just turn this around here like that and sculpt along the top. All right, same thing along the bottom here. And I can see my Cintiq is starting to slow down, so I may have to turn off some of these other layers right here. These are all kind of using memory. Okay, and then come back up here, and that improved it a little bit. It's still getting a little slow here. So Mudbox does use quite a bit of memory. And across the back here. All right. Turn that off. All right, that's starting to look interesting. And I think I'm not going to put all of the detail in here. We are going to pick up some of the finer detail over in Substance. So I'm just trying to sculpt in some kind of visual interest in here. And I could spend a lot of time doing this. Let's go ahead and put this one back on. You can see it's kind of hanging there as it puts that on there. Alright, so that's probably good for now. I think this will be enough interest and detail on here that once we take it over into Substance and merge it with the normals over there and combine the two, that we'll have a nice looking blade. So offline, what I'm going to do is finish out my other side here. So we'll come back in the next lesson and we'll take this into Substance and start working on the final look of it.